We know that peer support during pregnancy is known to increase breastfeeding initiation, and that continued support once baby is born increases both breastfeeding duration and exclusive breastfeeding. I'll link a really interesting meta-analysis that reviews the impact of in-person breastfeeding support for those of you who would like to check it out. In-person support was critical to my own feeling of efficacy and the feeling that I could endure the difficulty of my situation with my first child. Today, you will hear from 3 parents who have been guests of the podcast who talked about how critical in-person support was for their baby feeding journeys. As you listen, think about your own experiences. Did you receive peer support while learning to navigate feeding your baby from your own body? If so, how did it help you feel better about your experiences? If it didn't help you feel better, what would have made the support better? If you didn't reach out for in-person support, what got in the way? Was it your location, not knowing what support was available, a general feeling of overwhelm? I would love to discuss your thoughts about in-person support groups in my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. It's linked in the show notes, so join me there and introduce yourself and let me know your experiences with in-person support. I'll see you there. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. First, we hear from Megan from episode 55. She told the story of a traumatic C-section after deeply desiring an intervention-free birth. After that, she was led to feel fearful of her baby's weight, even though all other signs showed her baby was healthy. And to this day, she is almost 6 and is still in the 30th percentile on the growth chart. She went to an in-person support group for weighted feeds and got so much more out of it. Listen to what she had to say about the impact of that support group. Were the peer support groups that you were going to, were those helpful to be around other breastfeeding moms and just to
Yes.
see their breastfeeders? What did you gain from those?
Motherhood, especially early motherhood with a newborn, it can feel very lonely and isolating. And so I'm really, really looked forward to those sessions. I honestly really just sort of sat and observed and fed my baby is really what I sort of did.
Mhm.
But just being around other people, especially other mothers, feeding their baby in this way was just so reassuring to me and beautiful, like just to watch. Um, yeah, I loved that.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I went for a long time to the hospital one led by my lactation consultant who helped me for a long time with my oldest. And she finally so politely and so nicely was like, I think I went for like 9 months. And she
Yeah.
finally was like, Breastfeeding USA has in-person support groups and they have babies of all ages, babies and
Yes.
toddlers, because it was all
Yes.
like itty bitty babies at the hospital. And I
Exactly.
was like, got it, got it. It's time
Yes.
for me to move on.
That's so funny. And I did have a similar experience where I remember when Penny was just tiny, and I remember like the very first time I went, seeing a 2-month-old baby who looked enormous to me and thinking like, "Oh my gosh, I can't imagine her ever getting that big." And then, yes, I went for months, like probably about 6 months, and I definitely had the big old baby in the room. Everyone else was all the other babies were tiny.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I always encourage people to try to go to an in-person support group. They're harder to find now because with COVID now,
Right,
there's some restrictions around meeting in person from peer support groups now, but you can
right.
find them. And there's just something about sitting
Yeah.
in a room of people feeding their babies, even if you don't have a question. I
Yes.
struggled so much with my first. I just needed to be in a room of people who got it
Right,
sometimes.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I did attend another, like it wasn't a breastfeeding group, it was just like a mom support group, that I was part of, and that was actually very instrumental in I forgot about this group, but it was so big and so important to me, at the time, and it was really instrumental in me learning to breastfeed my baby anywhere that I go, whenever I want, whenever she wants milk. That was really huge because I started going to the support group very early before Penny was even a month old. And there were a lot of other moms with babies, and they would just breastfeed the baby when the baby had to eat, of course. But I remember the first time going to this group and thinking, please, Penny, don't be hungry during this 1 hour. Like, I just remember thinking that, right? And, because I didn't want to figure out how to breastfeed her in public, but, sort of not show my breast and whatever. At the time, this is what I was thinking. And then just seeing all these other women just like feed on demand when the baby needs to be fed was huge. Like, it was so huge to me, because my inkling, and again, I guess my intuition kept telling me, like, just feed your baby when you need to feed your baby. Even I tried using a breastfeeding cover like twice, maybe, and I hated it. I hated it. She hated it. It was just not for us. And honestly, I also felt like I shouldn't have to just sit at home and do nothing but feed my baby, or stay at home only so that I can feed my baby whenever she needs to. Like, I should be allowed and able, of course, to go out into public as I see fit, and then if she's hungry, she's going to eat. And so it was just very helpful in that regard, and they also helped me, and this is actually related to breastfeeding as well. Um, they helped me to figure out, in the first couple of weeks that Penny was here, we tried to have her sleep in a bassinet next to the bed, and that didn't work well for us. And I kept basically ending up bringing her and breastfeeding her in the bed, and we'd fall asleep. And I would feel really guilty, like ridiculously guilty about this. And until one day I was at the support group and a mom said, was sharing her experience with co-sleeping with the baby in the bed. And I asked her a few questions and she's like, "Oh yeah, this is what we do." And I remember just feeling like this huge weight of relief. Like, okay, so this is not actually crazy. Like, I had been feeling guilt, and on the other hand, I was like, this makes so much sense. Like, this is so fantastic having the baby just here between me and Brett. When the baby needs milk, she basically like gets milk, and I get to continue to lay in the bed and fall asleep while she's nursing. I started getting so much more sleep. Um, oh gosh, it was just absolutely amazing. But I think having those peers and those examples, I mean, it's just like so important and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I joined a mom's club too when my son was about um he was between 2 and 3. He was 2, I think. And, several of them had two-year-olds, but they also had older children. And I remember talking about the witching hour when he
Yeah.
was a toddler and I was trying to make dinner and he was just
Yeah.
losing his mind. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with this child." And they were like, "Do you ever just put on Sesame Street?" And I was like, "No, we only watch screens together." And they were like,
Right.
"Why?" I mean, you're exhausted, he's exhausted.
Right.
Wouldn't you rather like have a nice drink and cook dinner in silence? And I was like,
Yes.
well, yes, but and they were like, just do it. And it
Yeah.
just like just having these moms who I looked up to, who I
Right.
thought were great
Exactly.
moms, giving
Hmm.
me permission to put Sesame Street on for my
Yeah.
child while I made
Yes.
dinner. Just like giving me the permission to do that changed the game for me.
Yes.
And now
Exactly.
they watch
Exactly.
TV while I record podcast interviews.
Support. I mean, over and over again throughout. And it continues to be a huge part of my life now. Like everything that I have done since having these babies pretty much involves me finding the right support system and immersing myself into it. And
Mm-hmm.
then when someone is not aligning with the way that I want to parent or mother my child or breastfeed my child or also in any area of my life, I don't spend time with them and I find a new person to put into
Mm-hmm.
my, you know, circle.
What Megan has to say about everything that she has done since having babies pretty much involves finding the right support system and immersing herself into it rings so true for me too. And when you first have babies, your world feels pretty turned upside down, especially for so many of us who don't live very near family, or maybe the way that we are raising our kids doesn't quite align with how our own families raised us. And so we're having to forge a new path. And so we can learn to do that by creating intentional communities and seeking out those in-person support groups where we can find those examples of parenting that we would like to be. And I encourage you to look those up in your area, whether it's through a parenting group or a breastfeeding group or a baby carrying group or an outdoor exploration group. It's so important to find the people who you can ask questions of and not feel judged by and meet with in real life to get the support that you need. My own home birth midwife, Joyce Kimball, was featured on episode 33. Her story was incredibly raw as she spoke of postpartum psychosis and learning to navigate new motherhood and balancing being a parent to a high needs baby while returning to her corporate job with very little support. This is what she had to say about what in-person support did for her. And at that time, were there any peer support group? Was La Leche League around?
So this is what saved me from killing myself. At 3 months post-birth, I found a La Leche League group, and it literally saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
Not because the breastfeeding or sleeping got better, but because I could say hard things without being judged.
Great. Yeah.
I could have compassion. Like people gave me compassion. And some of those women are my best friends, and we do Mom's Weekend Away now. Like it created a community for me.
Yeah.
Because the breastfeeding event, the pain went away and I had a lot of milk, but I had a high needs, high colicky,
Right.
never sleep kiddo.
Joyce's explanation is one that really resonates with me. In my own situation, I did not need anyone giving me advice about how to change my baby or how to change my situation. I just needed people to listen and to tell me, yeah, it's hard, and to let me know that I wasn't crazy and to tell me I was doing a good job. I just needed people to be with who understood my situation. And that's what Joyce needed too. And she got that in those in-person support groups. They didn't tell her, oh, do this with your baby. Oh, you should sleep train. Oh, you should change the way that you're mothering. They just were there for her. And when you find the right in-person support group, it can really change the game. And I see so many people turning to online support and asking all their questions there amongst strangers. And if that's all you can do, because there's no way for you to get out and find that in-person support, it's better than nothing. But they don't become your lifelong friends, which is so critical to feeling like you can do this, that you are a good mom. Before we move on to our final story of a guest who used a support system to really feel better about her baby feeding situation, I would like to talk to you and say, I would love to be a part of your support system. If you would like some non-judgmental support to help feed your baby, I would love to be that person. The way I would love to work with you is to combine your expertise of your body and your baby with my expertise of the science of milk supply and lactation and hormones. We'll combine our expertise to come up with a plan for feeding your baby that feels right for you. If you would like to work with me personally to be the person that helps you feel really good about your situation, you can go to my website, which is linked in the show notes, www.quabbinbirthservices.com. I can't wait to connect with you personally. So now I want to bring us to episode 8, where Melissa shared her experiences of desperately wanting to exclusively breastfeed and ultimately needing to feed formula to both of her children, most likely due to a breast reduction surgery, which she had had years earlier. She attended a La Leche League meeting during pregnancy in order to feel supported and educated while preparing for her babies, and turned to them again when things weren't going well. This is what she said about the support she received while mourning her changed plans.
At 3 months when she stopped, I was devastated.
Oh.
I called the the hospital, and they're like, "Yeah, it just happened." And I'm like, trying so hard to make it work. And I remember just going to like Leche League and crying, and um, they just held me. I remember like going in. I don't know what they were planning on talking about that day, but they just like held me, and they just all supported me. And everyone's like, "Oh, but it might be easier for your next child because this child like made the pathways for your next one to be easier." I'm like, "But then I like messed this one up." And
Wow.
they just loved me, and they let me like continue going to the meetings as I made formula bottles for my baby in the
Yeah.
La Leche League meetings,
Mm.
which was really nice just to still be supported, because I was a yoga teacher and like a hypno babies like birth, and like I'm like I think of myself as like natural hippie. Like I don't think I put my daughter down for 2 months. Um
Mhm.
we were both happy with it, so it worked. And so I really was like hoping I'd like breastfeed for until she was done, when she told me, and I thought it would be older than 3 months old.
Humans were not meant to parent in isolation, yet so many of us feel so lonely as we try to navigate new parenthood, toddlerhood, the childhood years, and the adolescent years alone. So if you are the parent of a baby and it feels lonely and hard, I see you. I get it. I've been there. And there are in-person support groups that are there to help hold you up, to hear how it's hard, and to make it a little easier. And I hope after hearing these 3 stories of 3 moms who felt so deeply supported by groups that didn't really care how they fed their babies, but were originally designed to help parents feel supported in breastfeeding, which we know is not fully supported right now culturally where we live in the United States and all across the globe. If you would like to hear the full stories of Megan, Joyce, and Melissa, you can check them out on episode 55, 33, and 8, All 3 stories are deeply impactful, have 3 completely different angles, but have so much to share, and we can learn from all 3 stories about how we can navigate so many systemic barriers that make feeding our babies difficult. If you know someone who is navigating new parenthood alone, share this episode with them. And of course, I have big plans for the Milk Making Minutes. I would like to get some big guests on, and the way they know that this show is worth their time is by seeing that lots of people listen. And the way they see that lots of people listen is by seeing your ratings and reviews. Thanks.